If you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. We have new stories every day. Let's go. Dave Brown was sitting in a chair in his living room. Across from him stood an empty couch. Between his chair and the sofa was a coffee table with 3 glasses of champagne, 1 full, 2 empty. A bottle of champagne sat in an ice bucket next to the table. At 7:20 p.m., anyone watching him saw him relax. Dave seemed relaxed, even though he'd said he'd heard his wife's car in the driveway. There were no other people around. Dave was alone in the room. He carried on sitting with a relaxed expression, but when the front door opened, he couldn't see who it was, but he immediately heard his wife's, "Dave, where are you?" voice in the living room. Dave stood up abruptly as his wife entered the room. She was holding the hand of a man who was 5 years younger than her. He was 49, thin and average height. He was wearing a business suit. In her other hand, she held an orange, a 4 envelope, and a note. "Dave, this is Michael. Michael, this is my wife." Dave noticed that she was looking away and seemed nervous, so he took 3 steps and shook the intruder's hand. "I'm very glad to meet you, Michael. Do you mind if I call you Mike?" "Not at all, sir. Can I offer you a glass of champagne? Or please, have a seat." Dave watched as his 2 very embarrassed people sat down. He sat down on the sofa and took the glasses of champagne that were offered to him. He filled them with a toast, saying, "To your health." Deborah and Mike looked at each other. Mike nodded slightly and squeezed her hand. "I fell in love, and I want a divorce so we can get married." She stopped, expecting her husband to be angry. She looked up from the floor to see Dave's expression. She didn't expect his face to remain neutral. Unconsciously, she moved a little closer to Mike. "Okay, Deb, are these divorce papers?" Deb looked up. Deborah was taken aback. She had imagined this scenario many times, but never in such a way. She looked at Mike and tried to convey with her eyes that she didn't know what to say. He took the envelope from her and placed it on the table. "Yes, Dave," she replied. "I think you will find them. Deb doesn't ask for much. He just wants her car, her statement of relinquishment of this house, her retirement fund, and all her other assets. Everything is signed and notarized. I'm a lawyer, so I'm sure everything is fine. But feel free to hire your own representative if you want to. Well, I must say you are both very generous." Deb looked very excited, like she was waiting for the other shoe to drop. It was Mike's idea. Dave, in fact, he insisted. He said it's bad enough that he's stealing your wife without taking your hard-earned assets. "I wasn't motivated by money. Mike is already quite well off, even without your money. We'll have more than you and I ever had. Maybe things would have been different if you'd got a job after the kids were older and helped with the finances." Deb looked down again, so Mike asked, "Is your wife going to give a similar speech, or has she already received one?" "No, my wife died 8 years ago. I'm a widower. I'm sorry to hear that." "Thanks, Dave. It hurt like hell for a year or so, but time heals all wounds, as they say. Look, I really regret this, but I met Deb, and she was like the missing half of my soul. I didn't think I'd ever be full again. I wanted to tell you that. I've been in love with your wife for several months now. It's okay, Mike. I never hold a grudge. Please marry her with my blessing." Mike and Deb exchanged stunned glances. Deb, because it wasn't at all what she expected. Then she felt great relief. A few months ago, she made Michael believe that her marriage was over. They tried to save it, but there was little hope. She knew that the weak point in her plan was Dave's reaction, which would make Mike realize that this was not entirely true. That's why she begged Mike to do it without confrontation. Mike insisted that real men solve problems head-on and didn't give in to persuasion. Mike was stunned because even after Deb told him that her marriage was on its last legs, he expected a more angry reaction from what she said. He formed a mental image of Dave from what she said. He was a large, uneducated man who was used to solving problems with his fists. Mike toyed with the idea of bringing a bodyguard with him tonight, but eventually dismissed the idea. In the depths of his soul, he knew it was a bad idea. Mike was pretty sure that Dave wasn't going to be happy about this. He'd expected a more angry reaction from Deb's descriptions. He'd formed a mental image of Dave from what she said, a large, uneducated man who was used to solving problems with his fists. Mike toyed with the idea of bringing a bodyguard with him tonight, but eventually dismissed the idea. He thought that if the offended husband hit him a little, it might ease his own conscience. His own sense of decency weighed on him, so he asked, "Deb, I assume you met Mike at one of your girls' parties." Deb nodded toward the coffee table. "One of those girls' nights out that you assured me was completely harmless and didn't threaten our marriage when I asked this time." Deb nodded towards the floor. I think this is a lesson for you, Mikey boy. Mike looked at Deb. Deb's gaze moved to an area of the floor a little further away from Mike. What happens to people now? Come on, Deb. You have to have a plan. You're giving me the house, so I'm guessing you were going to pack up your things and move in with him. You know, I was planning to do this tomorrow while you were at work. I'm pretty sure your lawyer friend will agree that this is a smart move. Let's get started on the parking. Deb and Mike stood up to go upstairs. Why don't we talk? Deb, you can start packing. Come on, Mike, let's chat. I think you owe me at least this. Deb was caught between wanting to steer clear of this truly awkward situation and having to sit in on the whole thing. Mike made the call to sit back down. Deb, I promise not to hurt him. I just want to chat until we get divorced. I'll take responsibility for your safety. I just want to make sure he has your best interests at heart. I'm sure you'll agree that it's not worth trying to talk you out of leaving me. Our marriage is obviously over. Both men watched her walk up the stairs and disappear. I must say you're very reasonable, Dave. It's okay, Mike. Between you and me, I've had to put up with Deb's love for about a year now. I guess that's when you met her. It'll be a relief for both of us. I don't want to condemn us to a loveless marriage. Thanks, Dave. You're welcome, Mike. As a lawyer, you know that when you sell a car or house, you have to point out any known defects to the new owners. Mike laughed. Slavery is dead, and I don't think Deb would like. I see what you mean, Dave. Dave smiled too, correctly guessing that Mike was an intelligent and decent person. Okay, now please believe that what I'm about to tell you is not malicious. I just want to point out some of Deb's flaws that may not be obvious after a year of dating. I also want to make sure she's happy in the future. I've loved her for 27 years, so I'd like to share what I've tried to do to make her happy, even though it didn't work out. This way, you'll know not to waste your time on the same thing. Mike nodded. He knew that what was about to happen probably wouldn't be entirely altruistic in intent, but he felt he had a responsibility to listen to this man who had done nothing wrong. I think Deb is back on the pills. Mike nodded again, feeling a little awkward. It was a lot to admit that he slept with this guy's wife. Yes, she takes pills. I had no idea she ever stopped. She was on the pill when we met, but about 6 to 12 months after we got married, she said she came off it and they suppressed her sexual appetite from then on. It was condoms for me. I can't stand these damn things. They take away all the spontaneity. I don't know about you, but I struggle to get by without them. Yes, I know what you mean, Dave. Then when we decided to stop at 2 children, she started using condoms as an excuse not to. I asked her to go back on the pills, but she refused, saying she didn't want to swallow artificial chemicals every day. Since then, our love life has declined. It's gone from several times a week to several times a month, and now it's down to 0. About a year ago, Mike didn't answer. He knew Deb was very careful about what food she ate and chose chemical. We still had sex at least 3 times a week, despite the restrictions on their meetings. I know this is very ungentlemanly of Mike, but I'd like to know if your wife satisfies your sexual needs. I was denied a lot of things, and then we stopped having sex completely until recently. I just got tired of getting knocked down and stopped. You could write in your diary to keep track of any sudden lows every month or so. Dave paused so Mike could add something, but Mike didn't take the opportunity. I also noticed that only a couple of years after our wedding, one day I looked around and suddenly realized that almost everything I owned before was gone. Bedclothes, a sofa, and photos of old. I found my girlfriends in the attic, but I don't know if all women do this, or if it's just Deb. It was as if she wanted to clear the nest of previous female influences again. Dave paused, and Mike remained silent. He thought about his new bed and sheets. Then he remembered his conversation with Deb a week ago about the portrait of his first wife, the woman he loved. Mike, until circumstances led to her being cut out of his life, I really hope you're better at spotting her lies than I am. Just 3 weeks ago, I asked if she still loved me and if things were good with us. She looked me straight in the eye and said yes. She did the same thing she always did, looking in the eyes until I broke eye contact. I can't believe it only took 3 weeks to fall out of love so much. Mike was taken aback by this conversation and the information Dave was trying to get across. Something about those last 2 sentences was worrying, but he didn't have time to think about it, so he focused on the only thing he could grasp. Don't worry, Dave. I'm a lawyer. I spent 20 years learning how to spot liars. They always give themselves away. I just wanted to give you a heads up. You might want to check out her underwear drawer. I wouldn't trust her blindly. I thought she was incapable of deception, but obviously I was wrong. What more can I say? If she stays true to form, she'll probably in about 6 to 12 months. She'll probably stop going to the gym and put on some weight. Dave stood up, took a photo album from the shelf and started looking through it. Here are a couple of photos from 2 years ago, when she started going to bachelorette parties. As you can see, her face and ass are plump. After having 2 children, who would be surprised by this? Mike turned a few pages and saw Mike was surprised by how much makeup she was wearing. He continued flipping through the pages. Is this Deb's mother? Yes, it is. Wait a minute. As you can see, she was a very glamorous woman. This is her when she was about 50. He opened the album and looked at the page he thought would be the one where Mike would say how old she was. Dave smiled and watched Mike look at the 2 photographs. I'm going to tell you about all the mistakes I made that meant she couldn't love me. Dave paused to pour the champagne. About 25 years ago, she wanted a wedding. I tried to object, saying that we would be better off investing in a house, but she said that if I had faith that we would be together forever, I wouldn't save on such an important day. If you want, I can find you a copy of our wedding video. From memory, we adhere to the traditional values of love, honor, obedience, and abandonment of all others. If you try something different, you might end up. She's doing better than me, but that's not your concern. Don't work your fingers to the bone and do a bunch of crap overtime so she can get the flash house she's always dreamed of. This didn't deter her. In fact, we're probably here because I refused to pay for the facelet she wanted, preferring to invest in our retirement. She can be quite persistent when her heart is set. You probably noticed that Mike nodded, wondering if this was a good quality in Deb. I shouldn't have thought that inviting her on a date every month to discuss everything that concerns me or our relationship was a good idea. It's starting to irritate or cause the slightest indignation. Our last date was less than a month ago. It was a while ago and she didn't say anything. I'm sure you're a man of your caliber and can think of something better at that moment. Mike noticed a twinkle in Dave's eyes and suddenly realized what he was up to. However, he made some good points. The idea of Deb being completely free of guile was very much at odds with some of his own thoughts of late. He was so taken aback by Dave's obvious amusement. Dave ignored the internal alarm and carried on talking, even though they both knew Deb had stopped coming down the stairs. She was within earshot, so he kept an eye on a list of things she plans to remove from the house. This is a good hint that she already disdains the marriage and is looking for a replacement. It won't change much about what happens after that. It's not uncommon, but it will help you prepare for the next steps she has planned and encourage you to look for more evidence. Mike blinked and looked around for the first time. He saw 3 champagne glasses and an ice bucket, which meant that all 3 of them knew about today's meeting in advance, even though there should have been only 2 of them. His usual highly observant nature had missed this. The clues Dave watched Mike's eyes dart towards the stairs. Yes, I knew it would be today. Deb had called him twice to make sure he'd be home by 7. Mike tore his eyes away from Dave and looked to where Deb was halfway down the stairs. She resumed her descent, clearly pretending that she hadn't heard the last few minutes of the conversation. Dave, so which family photo can I take now? Dave ignored her and leaned towards the opposite couch, never taking his eyes off his rival. The last thing I did wrong was forgive Deb when I first caught her cheating on our marriage. Dave admitted as much when Mike asked, and Deborah didn't try to deny it as she retreated into the kitchen. It was right after the birth of our second child that I forgave her because she and the counselor told me it was just a one-off mistake caused by postpartum depression. I often wondered if I was too soft on her. Maybe I should have been tougher at the time to stop it happening again. I told myself I was doing the right thing for the kids. They turned out to be good people, so I hope I did the right thing by them. I hope you will too. I hope you'll be generous enough to forgive her when your time comes. I don't know what to say, Dave. You don't have to say anything. Mike, just answer me. Look into your heart and ask yourself if you would forgive your late wife if you found her as your lover in your own bed for the first time. Mike lost his composure. He leaned forward and out of the corner of his eye, Dave noticed some movement and saw a pale Deborah was standing in the kitchen doorway, looking at me with a look of disdain. We loved each other too much for her to show me such disrespect. You said the first time, Deb, that she cheated on me with other men. No, it was not just twice, but on several occasions, both then and now. Now calm down, Deborah, Mike said in a quiet but firm voice. Surprisingly, the voice belonged to Mike. Deb stopped in her tracks. Mike, Deborah assured me that she didn't cheat because you had an open marriage. Dave said, did she look you in the eye when she talked about it? Mike looked at Dave, then at the cowering Deb, then back at Dave. Dave saw in Mike's eyes that he hadn't been as good at spotting a liar as he thought. What did she tell you about the state of our marriage? She said it's been rocky for a few years. Dave, you'd been seeing a psychologist for a while, but neither of you had any hope. Dave didn't answer. He just stared at Mike as Dave carried on chatting to fill the silence. I don't think that really fits with what you were saying about still going on dates and asking if she loved you. Dave kept looking into Mike's eyes. He chose the exact moment when Mike realized that he had been played like a complete sucker. It was an expression that could easily be interpreted as self. Mike turned to the frozen Diora and said, "You're a real pain in the neck. You've made me the person I despise most. A man who sleeps with other people's wives without their husband's knowledge." Deb dropped to her knees. Mike was suddenly speechless and interested. In the same spot on the carpet that had so fascinated Deb before, he finally pulled himself together and looked at Dave again. "Please, Dave, you have to believe me. I had no idea." "Don't worry, Mike." Dave said, "I told you she's a good liar. God, I wish she had told me that we have an open marriage. Then I might have." Mike seemed to relax a little, but he stayed silent. "Does this mean the engagement is off?" "Absolutely. In that case, I'd like to introduce you to John and Alice." As they approached, Mike turned to see a young man and a woman. "I'd like to introduce you to my son, John, and daughter, Alice. They're listening to our conversation through a microphone. John graduated from law school 2 years ago, and Alice received her degree this year." John and Alice shook hands. With a confused look on his face, JN then took the envelope from the table and began to look through its contents. Dave turned to his daughter. "Do you believe me now?" Alice looked at her father and said, "Yes, Dad, I do." Her head was now on the floor, feeling the silence. She raised her head and met 4 accusing gazes. She jumped up and ran out the front door. No one made the slightest attempt to stop or follow her. John calmly finished looking through the contents of the envelope. "Everything seems okay. Dad, okay, thank you. Now who? I'd like a beer. This fizzy cat pee is good, but I need beer to get rid of the taste in my mouth." "Mom, I think I have to go," Dave said. Mike looked at the other man, noting that he was a head taller and much larger. He looked into Dave's eyes and saw the already familiar shine. "Dave, have you ever thought about a career in law?" I was thrown off balance by the way he passed off negatives as positives, and didn't give me time to think. It was worthy of the best prosecutor I've ever seen. Dave smiled modestly but said nothing. He loved his job and the people who surrounded him at work, so he looked away until he was sure. The tears that had accumulated in the corners of his eyes had disappeared. He would no longer look into his eyes. By this time, Deb Brown was already 700 millions away. She was walking quickly and accelerating as if her heels were on fire. In this situation, of course, I felt sorry for the children who will eventually understand everything. But is the woman right? Write in the comments. Thanks to everyone who took the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking and subscribing. If you haven't already, feel free to share your thoughts on the events in the comments below. Take care.